if I come from that, so that's emotional neglect, then that creates shame because little Vincent doesn't feel seen. He doesn't feel understood. He doesn't feel worthy of feeling heard and seen and acknowledged. So something that seems so slight like that, again, over time, if that is a chronic relationship or a chronic disposition, that creates a lot of shame. And that's the residue that doesn't leave, unfortunately. And so when we feel shame, shame is.
I'm excited to bring a fellow podcaster to the show today. So after you're done getting to know her today, be sure to go subscribe to hers too, like it, and get ready for a lot of fun and mental health conversation to help you know you are never alone. Bronwyn, thank you so much for joining me here on a mental health break.
Thank you, Vincent. I am happy to chat with you.
Oh, I'm excited as well. Everyone, don't stop networking, even though it doesn't always work. We were met through a cold network conversation. We decided to have a chat, and it went so well. We decided to go on each other's pods. She's up with me first, so get ready for an incredibly inspiring show. She knows that there are no other mental health professionals specializing in anger, a highly solicited topic. She does great work in her field and even behind the scenes, learning how much she's taking care of people now around the holiday season. But before we dive into her story, I do want to welcome you one more time to a mental health break, the number one podcast for mental health advocates. And today we are going to dive into a new mental health experience, a new journey, and I can't wait any longer to get this kicked off, Bronwyn. We had such a good talk our first time. I know it's going to be equally as impactful today. Please share your mental health story from wherever you feel comfortable starting.
So my mental health story, about 15 years ago, I was not a therapist at that time. I had a master's degree in nutrition, and I was very happy to stay in my field, but I fell into a very profound depressive episode, and I was desperately needing a good therapist, and I went to multiple therapists, and I could not find a good one. So I remember just sitting there in the chair. I was actually in the office, but before virtual took off like it did now. But I remember sitting there and just thinking to myself, Bronwyn, you are hardly functional right now, but I still think you would make a better therapist than this person. So that was actually part of my healing journey out of that depressive episode, was going back to school, getting a master's in counseling psychology and my 3,000 hours and like becoming a licensed therapist. And looking back on that depressive episode, and I had a subsequent one that was actually much more profound and pernicious. But I realized both of those were due to suppressed anger. And I started kind of connecting the dots, with all my clients, that all of their depressive episodes and their anxiety episodes and their panic attacks and their mania and their psychosis was all a result of suppressed, or what we can call dissociated anger. And I started kind of just connecting dots. Like, if we can have a healthy relationship with our anger in real time and channel it out of our bodies in healthy ways. So that means like assertiveness, like saying what is true, what we need to say in that moment. And that doesn't have to be yelling and screaming. That can just be saying, Vincent, I don't know what's going on for you, but you're 15 minutes late again. So I'm not raising my voice. I'm not violent. I'm not disparaging you. I'm just saying, hey, what's going on? So, or hey, that's not okay. This is how we channel the anger out of our bodies, that with boundaries, with accountability. And then we don't have to get sick, because that's what happens is, anger is invisible, but it doesn't just disappear when we don't channel it out of our bodies. I believe it actually sticks, it stays in us, it kind of ferments, it kind of putrefies, and it makes us sick, and it makes us have depression, anxiety, and whatnot. And it also creates a lot, I believe, especially having a background in nutrition, I believe suppressed anger stagnating in our bodies creates a lot of real physiological disorders like migraines, headaches, digestive issues. I personally had insomnia for 3 decades on and off, that I now, sleep like a baby. So all of those
Yeah.
things, yeah, I believe all of that. And including, like, I see vertigo in my clients, I see autoimmune disorders. So all of those things I believe are from dissociated anger. And so if we can heal that, we can avoid therapy. We can just be healthy.
And I think that's such incredible advice. Start doing this hard work on ourselves and then see what resources are going to help us best. For some, it is therapy, of course, but there's a lot of other great ways to improve our mental health. What are some things that worked for you on this journey, this long journey you had to now, like you said, sleeping like a baby?
Yeah, so the 3 decades of insomnia that I had on and off, I attribute that actually to when I finally saw the truth about my father and, just expressed it to him, held him accountable. And I had to give him an ultimatum like, well, you can apologize for how abusive you've been my whole life and still are, or, and become a safe person, or not. And if you do apologize and work to become a safe person, we can have a relationship moving forward. And if you don't, we can't. And he chose the former. He chose not to. And so I've had to, quote, cut him off, but it's not really cut off because it's really him cutting himself off. But yeah, the minute I woke up to who he really is and gave him that ultimatum, held him accountable, is when I started sleeping like a baby.
Well, I know that couldn't have been easy, and it certainly was challenging, I'm sure, but I
Yeah.
do want to let you know that I hope you're giving yourself the credit you deserve to come out of something challenging like that because it seems like from what I'm seeing here is that was a block in your life and it let you kind of spread your wings and now thriving in your practice. I touched on it, so I got to come back to it. And also doing an awesome another mental health podcast. Her podcast is called Angry at the Right Things. Let's talk about that a little bit.
I think we view, again, not just the lay community, but even the therapeutic institution, we get anger wrong. We think we need to manage it, you know, and breathing, deep breathing, that's not a bad thing. It never is. But really, it's managing a symptom versus getting to the root of why we're angry. Let's look down at the root. Let's examine what's going on. Because if we can view anger as like a light on the dashboard of our car saying, hey, check under the hood, there's something wrong. And the point is to bring it to resolution, to bring repair to something. If we can view anger as the same, it's not there so we can be explosive, so we can be hurtful, even though that's, what anger is known for. Anger can just be, okay, this is a warning light. This is a barometer telling me something needs repair in my life, in my relationships, because we can't be angry without another person. So, although we can have, anger at ourselves too, that does exist, but it is always in a relationship, in the context of relationships. So, once we start to look under the hood at what is going on. So, for example, I believe anger, what's under anger is always a feeling of betrayal, of rejection, or of abandonment of some sort like that. So the people who create the most pain for us are people who are close to us. The person on the freeway who cuts us off can make us angry for, a few seconds, but only a partner, a parent, someone really close can really betray us and hurt us. And then we're going to dissociate from that anger because we don't want to admit it. We don't want to lose them. Maybe we're afraid of them truly abandoning us. So now we're suppressing that anger and now we're getting sick, right? So if we can just look at it and go, what's going on? With me and with my father, it was like, I didn't want to lose him. But when I finally was able to see how toxic he was, how abusive he was with me, how much damage it was doing, and then, how that had been throughout my life, and connect with, little Bronwyn and just go, you know what, little Bronwyn, that was abusive and it really hurt you. And I'm really angry on your behalf because you were very vulnerable when you were 10 years old. And I'm going to do right by you. I'm not going to betray you anymore by putting you in this vulnerable position, even today, with a person who you can't predict what he's going to say. He's not consistent. He's not safe. You can't trust if he's going to hurt you again or not. And so I'm going to be a healthy and safe attachment figure for you, little Bronwyn, by protecting you from him, by holding him accountable. And when we start to do that, when we start to advocate for ourselves, with that anger moves us forward and we channel it in that healthy way, we actually start to integrate with our own inner child and we become more whole, if you will, because integration means wholeness, soundness.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you for sharing all that. And while you just touched on children a bit and that, how can we raise truly resilient children?
Yeah, so we can raise truly resilient children when we help them know they matter. And the best way to do that, and the way we can't avoid doing that, is not by telling them, "Hey, little Vincent, you matter to me." No, that means nothing. What we need to do is we need to say, even if our child's, driving us crazy, which you know what, children will do that.
Yeah.
Even if they're driving us crazy, if I can look at you and say, you know what, 5-year-old Vincent, even though, and I'm not going to say this out loud, even though you're driving me crazy, but I will say this part out loud. You know, I can see why you're angry right now. I can see why you're upset at me because you're used to getting that cookie and I'm not giving you the cookie. And you know what? I don't blame you for being angry. That must be really hard for you that you're used to getting the cookie and now it seems so random that I'm not giving it to you. So I don't blame you. And that doesn't mean I'm going to give you the cookie, but I can validate your feelings. I can um, let you know that your feelings matter. I'm also saying my feelings matter too. I'm saying, little Vincent, but mommy, she's frustrated with all this screaming and she needs a break. So everyone's feelings matter. It's not an either or. My feelings matter, but also little Vincent's feelings do matter. And when he grows up in a household where he is being validated, where he is feeling seen, he is going to be a resilient child.
Thank you for sharing all that. Everyone, I've gotten so much value from today and inspiration. Stick around just a few more minutes. You'll find out how to get in touch with her. But while we're talking about feeling validated, feeling wanted, right, feeling loved, if we're not, there could be some shame in our lives. The role shame plays in our lives. Let's talk about that a little bit and then how to dislodge it after.
So let's talk about shame. I have come to see now shame as like the sticky residue that remains after anything that we would term traumatic. And I want to just also include anything that maybe we wouldn't term traumatic, anything that we would term painful or difficult or hard or abusive or toxic, anything bad. So, because we don't think of neglect as traumatic, but it is actually. And so neglect, so that and that's the most common, so I'll start there because we could talk about physical abuse, sexual abuse, all of that, but all what they all do, including neglect, because neglect ironically gets neglected, is it creates shame for the child. So again, going back to, if I'm a parent who's like, little Vincent, even though you're driving me crazy, like, you matter, your feelings matter, I get that you're angry with me, that's okay to feel. When I do that, your little Vincent's not feeling shame. But if I don't do that, which seems so innocuous just to forget to do that, but it's not. If, and again, we're talking about over time, chronically. So if chronically I come from the old school parenting of like, hey, I'm your mom, so you're going to do what I said. I don't care what you feel. If I come from that, so that's emotional neglect, then that creates shame because little Vincent doesn't feel seen. He doesn't feel understood. He doesn't feel worthy of feeling heard and seen and acknowledged. So something that seems so slight like that, again, over time, if that is a chronic relationship or a chronic disposition, that creates a lot of shame. And that's the residue that doesn't leave, unfortunately. And so when we feel shame, shame is what it does. It actually dissociates us from ourselves, like our core self. It gives us the message, I'm defective. I'm not good. I am not worthy. And it makes us it kind of exiles us from our core self. And so we don't trust ourselves, and so let's say you're someone who has a lot of shame. I used to be a person with a lot of shame until not that long ago. Um, and if I'm in a situation and someone's like, let's say I'm buying a used car and there's like the used car salesman and he's a little sketchy and he's giving me like something that doesn't feel right. I'm kind of like, wow, this intuitively doesn't even seem possible. The promise he's making me. If I have a lot of shame, I'm not going to trust my gut right then and there because my gut is filled with shame. It's dissociating me from my core self, that my gut, my intuition. So I'm not going to trust myself. And I'm going to be more likely to get utilized, to get objectified by this person, by other people, because I'm not trusting myself. And then that can create more shame. And I'm going to disassociate from my shame. So a lot of us, when we feel shame, we engage in really shameful behaviors as a way to kind of like disassociate more from the shame. And so it just creates this horrible snowball effect. I really believe that the enemy of humanity is shame. And yet, again, this is relatively recent for me. I'm 54. So this is like 4-ish years ago. I went for a run one day. And while I was running, I was kind of like having this awakening. And I just suddenly had this image of little Bronwyn, 10-year-old little Bronwyn at the dinner table. And my dad is mocking me, which is what he would do every night at the dinner table from ages 10 until I left the home at 17. And I just was at a stoplight and I closed my eyes and I pictured my adult self entering that memory, going to little Bronwyn, looking her in the eyes and saying, little Bronwyn, I know how ashamed you feel of yourself, but I have this huge cardboard box right now, and we're going to put all that shame that you're feeling in this cardboard box. And then we're going to give it back to our dad. We're going to say, hey, you know what? This isn't mine. It never was. It's yours. Return to owner. And so I imagine doing that in that imagination exercise, just giving it back. And from that moment, something in me just shifted so profoundly. I don't even have words for it. It was like all of a sudden, I started trusting myself again. I started, listening to my gut. I started believing in myself. And after that, there was like, I had an exchange with someone who tried to shame me. He actually devalued me. He like listed off all these things. It was horrific. But I sat there and instead of taking it in like I would have done in the past and been like, oh my God, I'm horrible. I sat there and I didn't feel shame in my gut. I actually felt disgust at this person. And I just like looked at him and I was like, that's not true.
Yeah.
That's not true. None of this is true. What are you talking about? And I'd never been able to do that for myself. And as we do that for ourselves, we grow stronger because we're being true to ourselves. We're not betraying ourselves. And we're filling out our core more and more. We're coming whole again. We're becoming integrated. So it was like a pivot that day when I gave that shame back to my father in my imagination. And that's what I lead my clients in. And that's also what I do on my podcast for the listeners. I want them to be able to do that for themselves, that same exercise.
Oh, well, thank you for sharing that, everyone. You're going to have to download this podcast. But before I let her go, before I get her contact info, I'd love to just ask, do you have one piece of advice you can offer some of our mental health champions today who may be going through a rough time?
Yeah, I would say that life is too short to betray ourselves for a single moment. And being true to ourselves is not selfish. It's the opposite of selfish because when we flourish like a flourishing tree, it provides shade and habitat and even fruit for thousands of creatures and humans. And flourishing humans benefit the whole world, and we all need more of those. So being true to ourselves is where it begins and where it ends.
Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for such an incredible show. I am so glad we connected. Would you now mind please sharing your contact website, whatever you have for our audience, and your podcast, of course?
Yeah, so Angry at the Right Things is the podcast. You can find me. I'm on LinkedIn, just my name, Bronwyn Schweigerdt. And then same with Facebook. I'm starting to get on to Instagram a little bit. My daughter's helping me. I'm kind of old for Instagram, I think, but starting to do some of that, like shorts, putting reels out, and
Good.
then also on YouTube as well.
All right, everyone, well, go check out her offerings, check out her pod. Thank you so much for tuning in today. And the show is at a mental health break on all podcast platforms, all social media platforms. You can find us on there too. My name is Vincent A. Lancy, and my social media is at my name, along with vincentalancy.com. Check out our show sponsor, Coming Alive Podcast Production, for courses, one-on-one, and any service you need at comingalivepodcastproduction.com. But with that, we are signing off today. Bronwyn, thank you so much for joining the show.
Thank you, Vincent.